get going. Good afternoon, councillors, staff and to our visitors. Welcome to our council meeting. And first, as it's NAIDOC week next week, a very important week in the life of Australia. Sorry? A busy week for you, yeah. So I invite Aboriginal Elder Auntie Sharon Holbrook to deliver a welcome to country. Thank you.
Welcome to Aboriginal land. I'd like to pay my respects to our elders, past, present and future, for they are the keepers of our knowledge, our art, our dance and most of all our culture. I also like to pay respect to the stolen generation as I acknowledge the survival and strength of all Aboriginal people, our grandmothers, our grandfathers and all our ancestors, all who have gone before us, and welcome you all to this land whose foundations are forever in the skies and the seas of Launceston. Pardon me. Our people have walked this land that you know as Tasmania for over 40,000 years. As you spend time together at the council meeting and also during NAIDOC week, our elders past and present may guide and support you as together we have the knowledge, experience and the strength to overcome any barriers and stand proud in our identity as Palawa people, the Aboriginal people of Launceston. I stand here as a proud Palawa woman and Aboriginal elder. Thank you and stay safe.
Thank you very much, Auntie Sharon, and we appreciate those words. Can I too, in the spirit of reconciliations, as the citizens of Launceston, we recognise that Launceston is situated on country of which the Tasmanian Aboriginal people have been owners for over 35,000 years, on which they have performed age-old ceremonies of celebration, initiation and renewal. We acknowledge the Aboriginal community of today, their living culture and unique role in the life of this region, and offer our deep appreciation of their ongoing contribution to our community. We thank you and please pass that on to your elders as well. And the Deputy Mayor will represent Council Monday at NAIDOC week, raising of the flag. Thank you. Please be seated. So in opening the meeting, I have one apology from Councillor Daking. Mere acknowledgements. I would like to acknowledge that another for top recycling 2022, Tasmanian Launceston City Council, for the third year in a row, would you believe? That's absolutely amazing. For the most mobile phones recycled, ending up in April is when they do the figures from. And it's 204 kilograms worth of old mobile phones. Absolutely fantastic through the hub here in our beautiful city. And just to put into perspective, the best in Tasmania, so that's council, it's in council areas. The best in Tasmania, also we're ahead of Queensland, Brisbane City, and we're ahead of South Australia. So that's fantastic. We didn't quite catch up with Victoria and the other biggest states, but I reckon that's a brilliant result. And I just want to thank our staff, Michael and the team, very much for the work they do in that and promoting it, but also council overall and the public. Without the public being acknowledging it and doing something about it, we wouldn't have this as well. So 3 years in a row, it's absolutely fantastic. So congratulations to council on that. Declaration of interest. Any declaration of interest? No. Confirmation of the minutes. Somebody happy to move the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 16th of June. Move Councillor Harris. Second of Councillor Spencer. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That is all councillors present. Council workshops. Council workshop report is there. Somebody happy to move? Councillor Mackenzie, second to Councillor Walker. Just to speak to it, Councillor Mackenzie. Councillor Walker, no. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. There's councillors' leave of absence, and that will be considered in closed council. Community reports. Andrew Jones from National Job Link, I understand, is here. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name's Andrew Jones, Program Manager with National Job Link, or NJL. Thank you very much for the opportunity of giving you a little bit of a summary in terms of a completed activity that we've recently done called Games Fest Digital Work is Real. This was funded by the Department of Education, Skills and Employment as part of their local jobs program initiative. NJL is a not-for-profit entity that has been actively involved in employment and training for near on 30 years. Our ongoing success and longevity is based primarily on our genuine intent to make a difference to those people that we work with and our innovative approach. Games Fest is a prime example of this. Those youth with an interest in online games are quite often marginalised within the community due to the assumption that games-related activities are not relevant to looking for a job. Games Fest challenged this view, in fact turned it on its head if you like, by recognising that by playing these games, those young people develop strong transferable skills that may be relevant to a range of industry and a range of jobs. We found that they have very strong IT skills, both hardware and software related, good problem-solving skills, teamwork and communication skills. In our endeavours to develop and deliver this training or activity, we were supported by another organisation, BitLink, who also a Launceston company that's technology and education focused. In terms of Games Fest, it was a 13-week program for our participants that participated 2 days a week. Training was organised into blocks, so there were 1-week blocks facilitated by NJL where we focused on developing their job search skills, whether it be interview techniques, cover letters, resumes, networking, that sort of thing. And then there were 3-week blocks run by BitLink that focused on the IT gaming side of things, where people had the opportunity to develop those transferable skills, and they also had the opportunity to develop and build their own game from scratch. Okay, so all the coding and all those sorts of things. Once the 13 weeks was finished, we also wanted to make sure our participants got the full benefit of that. So we ran one-on-one debriefs with each of them to actually help them make sure that they had an action plan going forward, a goal going forward. And then similarly had warm handovers back to their employment providers to bring them up to speed where those young people were at and where their next steps were going to be. In summary, Games Fest was, whichever measure you want to take, was certainly a success. It was wonderful to see these young people in an environment with others that had a similar interest and a supportive environment. We certainly saw them grow over the time, increase motivation, they increased their job search thing, and we also saw those transferable skills developed as well. Formally, I suppose, tangible outcomes. We had examples of interviews being attended, work trials. There's potential, I think, 8 or 9 internships that will be happening in the future for them, and there were some instances of actually employment being gained. So there were some really good tangible results there. We also had a number of people that actually, despite their previous negative experience with education, had made a commitment and desire to go back and do some more study. One thing I just want to add, one thing, probably not necessarily an unintended consequence or outcome, but we also found that there were significant social outcomes. We had one young lady particularly that advised us that she had trouble leaving her house for the last 12 months. She attended every session except for 2. Okay, so supported by facilitators, supported by her colleagues in the program, and she let us know towards the end of the program she actually went to Melbourne with a friend for the weekend. Okay, so even though we always look at employment and training options, I think the outcome and those social outcomes are particularly important as well. In terms of where we go from here, obviously activity has been completed now. I suppose we'll be evaluating and that sort of thing, and certainly be considering whether we actually deliver it, hopefully in other regions in Tasmania, whether that be North West Coast, Southern Tasmania. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and great for that introduction, and I wouldn't have thought games were that important, but well done. Appreciate to hear that, and it's great, and keep up the good work. It's really important. Thank you. It's now public question time, so questions from the public. Just state your name and address for the record would be great. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lauren Staggle. I'm just from West Launceston. My questions today are in regards to the future use of the former YMCA building. Based on the supplied feasibility report funded by the federal and state governments, does the Launceston City Council consider the number of veterans and first responders, including nurses, identified in the Launceston region as being significant enough to seriously consider Stand to Fitness's proposal as appropriate use for the former YMCA building?
Thank you. 3 questions. You got 3, is that?
Yep.
That's one.
Do you want me to just...
You do the 3 and then
Sure.
Shane will answer them.
Do you appreciate that Stand to Fitness has specialised mental health professionals on standby awaiting a building to operate from and does not require ratepayer funds? Do you require any further information on our proposal in order to shortlist Stand to Fitness for serious consideration?
Yeah, thanks for the question.
Thank you.
General Manager Shane Everhart will answer that.
Thank you. Look, we have received your proposal and I have responded, and we appreciate the support and the facilities required for first responders and veterans. At the moment, the facility is being used for community basketball and netball, and shortly the Benevolent Society will be providing some services out of there on a weekday. These are temporary uses, why we investigate what the best long-term use for the site is. Once we understand that, we're likely to go to an expression of interest for management of the site, which will be a public process that everyone would be welcome to participate in.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Hello, my name's Jacqueline. I'm from Trevelyan. I wanted to say first of all that I really appreciate the seaport. It's a beautiful place to walk, get exercise and get out of the house as a mum. The last couple of months I haven't felt safe in the seaport area, going from, you look really shocked. You haven't been there? Yes, I've been there. Oh, do you?
Anyways.
So there's a large homeless community there, and I'm sure a lot of these people are very disadvantaged people, maybe with mental health issues, but there are some there that pose threats to people like myself. And now that I have a daughter, I really feel like I need to speak up and say something about that. So my question to you, council members, what are your plans for this? Will the population of tents increase in the area? Is there somewhere we can house these people, you know, the homeless community? And why don't they have homes?
Yeah, that's a very complex issue. I can tell you that. You're talking about the Kings Wharf area, I assume, which rather than Seaport itself? Or?
Right, so Royal Park now has a lot of tents behind
Royal Park and then Kings Wharf, the further out. Yep.
So I park at Stillwater and I'd walk to Silos and back, sometimes twice.
Okay. Yeah, because I'm not sure on the Seaport that I've seen any homeless in tents, but I'm not sure. So I assume on the Seaport itself, the boardwalk.
So there's a yes.
Okay.
There's a bush area,
Okay. Well, thank you for that. No, we've actually had a long process of trying to work with this situation for Launceston, and part of that it has been to have showers and facilities for them, which is to help them at this point in time. We've also got a committee set up, and a committee now, or it's not set up yet, a new committee being set up, but we do have a current committee which is looking at this very issue. They met yesterday, I understand, so they are people from the different charities, etc., that are on there. They will advise us on what's the best way forward. As a council, we work with police where we can, because obviously we can't just move them all on either. It's a matter for the police as well. Right. And we work with the state government. And the issue with housing is really a lot has to do with the state government. They're the ones that provide the housing, and they provide crisis accommodation, etc. So we are working with them to try and get more beds around the Launceston area. Having said that, there'll always be some people that don't want to go to these facilities, and they're the ones that we struggle with, like everybody else. So any more solutions that you have, more than happy to hear them. But we hear what you're saying, and I understand your concerns. They are real. We understand that as a council as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good. Any other public questions?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This question to Council. It's to do really partly with something that's coming up later.
Just state your name and address for the record.
Sorry, I'm Helen Tate, 67 Burke Street, West Launceston.
Thank you.
So, as in the case with several of the blocks on the Peel Street subdivision, virtually all the bush understory and most of the large trees and the ground cover have already been removed. So that's a question for the next DA issue. But the question to Council is, what provisions and sanctions, for example, scenic protections, what provisions and sanctions are available to Council to prevent this situation arising? And then, given the UN Declaration of the Criticality for Native Species, the climate vulnerability, this is becoming to be realised as an emergency. Faunal extinction is an emergency. So I'm asking, will Council step up its focus on protecting natural values versus development at all costs? And the third part of this will be, how will Council be strengthening and upholding, through our planning scheme, through our Greater Launceston Strategy Plan and other rulings and guiding policies, will they work on developing our city more prudently in regard to our natural values?
Thank you. Richard from our Planning Department will answer that.
Development in the city is guided by the Launceston Planning Scheme. The Launceston Planning Scheme is a public document created through a public process. The community can get involved through that process. The documents are available for everybody to look at, and the provisions can be quite complex, but if people don't understand, the council officers are available to help people. The planning scheme deals with natural values, it deals with scenic management, and it deals with a lot of other things that are important to members of the community. And if you're having trouble finding that, or you want some assistance to know what it says, we'd be happy to help.
Thank you. Any other further questions from the public? Thank you. And then I did forget to mention the public questions on notice are there as well with the answers provided. Planning authority. So under the provisions of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993, Council acts as a planning authority in regard to items included in Agenda Item 9 as planning authority. First item is 9.1. We do have a number of speakers, and I remind speakers it's a 2-minute time limit, and you'll hear a sound at the end of the 2 minutes. First speaker is Amber Miller.
Thank you.
I'll just put the microphone up a little bit higher for you. Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Oh, it's for our recording as well.
Yeah? Sorry. So my name is Amber Miller. I live in Invermay. My property, located at 24 Bedford Street, is currently a rental property and is situated directly behind the development application on Russell Street, Invermay. My concern is that the reduction of sunlight into the main living area of my home will have massive negative impacts on my tenants and to the value of my home. I would suggest that the proposed building design be revisited in regards to height and distance from my boundary to guarantee a minimum impact of overshadowing. I also request that an independent sun study be carried out to allay these concerns that myself and other residents have. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah Jessup.
Hi, my name name's Sarah Jessup. Since purchasing the property of 13 to 15 Russell Street mid last year, some of the surrounding neighbours have been extremely hostile towards myself, my customers and my tenants. I have tried many intimidating tactics towards us, and I have been verbally abused, threatened, sprayed for spraying my weeds on my organic spray on my property, flashed out, stolen from, trespassed and property damaged, accused and bullied. Hence I have, after being threatened to my head punched in, I had security cameras that were professionally installed from Coverall Security. Many events which have been captured. In the last few weeks, social media slander. This has been from just a small minority of the, and not being very welcoming from the community. The tin shed pottery has been there for several decades and has been operating as a pottery shed. When I purchased this shed, it looked very run down and needed some attention, including becoming access compliant so we can provide access to a larger sector of the community. We have made many improvements both inside and out, which I believe has made considerable value to the street and the value of the surrounding homes. I am with my rights to build on the land that I purchased, not only on a house, but personal studio for myself, as I'm primarily a painter and printmaker. Many of the concerns from the objections and misrepresentations that have been addressed by the building designer and the town planner in his report. If the proposed building was to move to the front of the block, not only would it look completely out of place, loom largely when driving down Russell Street, but also create more shadowing on the community garden than what is currently proposed, as well as enclose the park more, taking away the current openness. With the house placed to the south of the end of the block and the boundary fence adjacent to the community garden, which was deliberately set back from the street, so it does not block in the garden and streetscape, allowing a more open feel for the park when driving down Russell Street. People have bought or rented these homes knowing that the parking and access availability. In recent years, there has been old homes in the Invermay area that have added a contemporary extension, including the two-storey home at the other end of Russell Street Park. I believe that the building designer has done a fantastic job at coming to a solution for a home to be built and comply with the flood and heritage codes.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much. Louise Finney. It's a bit soft, that bell.
Good afternoon. Louise Finney, 341 John Lees Drive, Launceston. I've been visiting the shed for the last 10 months as a visitor, because I'm not arty, and I would like to think that I can visit the house in the future if it's allowed to be built. As I understand, there's been a lot of controversy and a lot of unrest in the neighbourhood recently, but I agree with the council planners and what's been into the council that to build a house now, it has to be two-storey, and therefore it is going to take some sunlight. It's permitted use, so unfortunately some houses somewhere may have to suffer. As I understand, the house at the back of the block is within the rights of the sun reductions. I don't fully understand them, but the council do have them. I know that some of the objectors would prefer it in the front, but I personally can't see the point of that because the garden will become much more closed in and won't have that open, nice feeling that it does now. The area is changing, like a lot of places around Launceston, that is trying to get an inner city feel. With the university moving, the stadium across the road, Invermay, that does have a lot of heritage and a lot of history, will change, whether we like it, whether the residents like it or not, things will change. As I understand, the council wants that inner city to change, and I think this will only improve the area. The shed already, to me, looks better than it was 12 months ago, and I'm sure a house, if and when it's permitted to be built there, will only add to the street rather than detract from it. Who knows? Time will tell. Thank you.
Thank you. Sonia Bro.
Hello, members of the council. My name's Sonia Bruff and I live at 7 Ashburn Street, Carrick. I have gone into a business partnership with Sarah Jessup. I used to work for the University of Tasmania and I'm no longer doing that now. For those that don't know, I used to run the ceramics department. And since the downsizing, well, there will be a major downsizing, I felt really, with my skill set, felt obligated to help Sarah keep running the actual tin shed pottery, which we now call Russell Street Studios, because we wanted to give it that whole new look and try and cater for this rise in people yearning for knowledge to learn about ceramics. Even though Sarah is taking off the back end of the shed to build her house, which she has every right to, it's not going to affect the working pottery shed at all. And she's actually building her own personal painting studio space to get away from the messy ceramics, which I've been told that I'm not allowed to visit her studio space because I'm a messy ceramics person. So, and there is this real sense of that Sarah's going to build this other studio space for people to hire. Trust me, she'll be in there making and doing what she does best. So I just really wanted to say that I'm very appreciative to be given the chance to talk to you guys. We haven't came in to the area to do anything malice, as we've been made feel by certain members of the community. There's also a large part of the community that support us, but due to not wanting to actually come out in public and say anything for fear, they haven't come today, but that's okay.
Yeah, thank you. Your time is up.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Ellie Thorogood.
Hi, I'm Eli Thorogood.
Oh, Eli.
So I'm 44 Connaught Crescent, West Launceston. I've come here today just to support Sarah in the application. I think all of us agree with the town planner report. Russell Street Studio is a small, not a large business. Sarah is a teacher that gives back to the community and looking to complement her business with a home. Sarah's intention, I can assure you, is to minimise the impact to the surrounding neighbours through a building, whilst also meeting the building codes required. The house has been designed to minimise the shade to the garden, including a fence that only goes 3/4 of the way along the property to keep the garden open. The parking she has added, it actually gives more. The parking she has added is designed to minimise the impact on the street parking, where some residents have informal agreements. Russell Street has also had more client parking than many of the surrounding businesses. Sarah runs a tight ship, and as part of that, she has added limited hours access via a security pass beyond what is required. Sarah is a leader in the community that adds value to the greater Launceston community through supporting the arts, whilst enabling people to have a space to follow a passion in life, and that this also includes other residents of Russell Street. For many, the space and services Sarah has enabled through Russell Street is providing therapy for those in our community in need. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Morgan Tumer.
Hi there, my name's Morgan Tumer. I live at 50 Wycombe Rise, St Leonards. I would like to say thank you to the Mayor, councillors and the Aboriginal community that present us today. I am a resident at Russell Street Studios, but I am also going there for NDIS mentoring under Sonia Bro. I am not the only NDIS participant that attends Russell Street Studios. In my time there, I have experienced the intimidation and also the malice and unjust treatment from some of the community around. I am advocating for not only myself today, but the other NDIS participant that does attend. I do not want her to go through what I've had to go through with her lack of processing and ability to understand the situation. Sarah does a lot for the community services as her work, but as you can tell, there is also community services that partake at Russell Street Studios. I think that any argument about the disability access, toilet and car park is unreasonable, considering that there is NDIS participants attending. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Belinda Steele.
Good afternoon. My name is Belinda Steele. I live in 26 Bedford Street, and I am standing before you today with my representation against the proposed development. I would like to start off first with saying that as a resident and a heavy user of the community garden, I absolutely refute the statements, personalised statements just being made by Sarah Jessup in regards to every resident in the area making abusive threats and whatnot regarding her development. That is simply not true. So I'd like to have that out and about now. I'd like to say that planners are tasked with balancing development and existing personal needs of residents, and it is not an easy spot to be in. However, with this development, you will see that there is a prioritisation of a privileged applicant over 8 direct properties that will be affected by this development, with overshadowing, with the setback of the frontage being it's about 13 metres, and that is quite out of character of the immediate neighbourhood. The setback is causing increased shadowing to 8 different properties. It's also causing shadowing to the community garden. We believe that the prioritisation of the car park, which is located also at the primary frontage, which according to the Sustainable Parking Code should actually be at the back of the primary building, is the reason why this planning approval has some problematic issues. Also, the fact that Russell Street is a high traffic area and no traffic impact assessment was requested by the city planner. Bedford Street had a traffic assessment done in 2019, and we found that assessment found that up to 70 cars an hour go down our small street during peak traffic. Now that doesn't account now the university development that's well going ahead, the car parks, etc. So we'd like to request a traffic assessment.
Your time is up, so if you could just finish off.
Yep, to be carried out before any sort of approval is made of this development application. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Bernie Steele.
Good afternoon. I'd just like to reiterate what Belinda was saying. The overshadowing on my house, I live at 26 Bedford as well, will greatly impact that, the way we live. It'll increase electricity bills and, not having access out the back seems ridiculous when it's been a dunny can lane, they used to call it, for years and years. And now, for some reason, it's been put onto a property portfolio, and Ms Jessup thinks she owns it. But unfortunately, when she first came into the area, she put nearly everybody off. And nobody wants to talk to her, and that's the way it'll continue until she changes her attitude. Thank you.
Thank you. Fiona Hughes.
Hi, for those that don't know me, I'm Fiona Hughes. I'm a proud Thai law Pakanal woman, and I acknowledge my elders past and present. I was introduced to Russell Street Studio a few months ago, winning a huge contract with UTAS, and was so honoured to be welcomed into a space with a lot of children, and a lot of community of all ages, young and old. As far as the laneway go, it is part of her property, so I'm aware of that. I just feel the garden has never been looked after when I got there a few months ago. So I just think we're about growth, and I look at huge buildings, and over the time, and my people have looked at huge buildings. Look at one today. Yes, they do overshadow some houses, but it's part of society and we need to move forward. And as I'm aware that UTAS don't have a studio at the moment, it's a good place for people with disabilities, but also Aboriginal people and all walks of life to come in and do the best in the arts arena. And it's not just about ceramics, we also do paintings and the rest of it in there. So I support Sarah's house to be built because I live behind a big house and it blocks my son too. So I just want you to be aware of that, and we've got to get on with life. And why should we, knock back something that's going to benefit the whole of the community? So thank you.
Thank you. That's all the speakers I have here. Are there any other speakers for item 9.1? Nope, thank you. So we have 9.1. Somebody happy to move a motion? Councillor Mackenzie, moved as is. Seconded Councillor Harris. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Mackenzie?
I do, thanks Mayor, and I guess I'll just remind our councillors that we sit here as a planning scheme today, making decisions on the planning scheme. I note from the commentary that's been presented to us by a number of the representatives and the applicants that there's a fair amount of angst that's going on in and around Russell and Bedford Street, which doesn't necessarily relate to this development application. So we need to actually focus our minds on what the development application brings to the table today and not the other issues that have been discussed so far today. Having said that, there are a number of representations that have been made in relation to matters that do impact on the planning scheme, and if you actually look at the matters that are actually there for interpretation, I think there are about 10 of them which needed to go to look at the standards over and above the right of doing things. It's a challenging area. It's in an area which has been built up many, many years ago, and it's an old established part of Launceston with narrow streets. There are lots of heritage buildings within that streetscape. The Russell Street Studio isn't one of those, and the part of the land that's being looked to develop on today actually has an old bit of shed which is going to be demolished for part of the new development that's proposed. I looked at a number of the issues where the setbacks and the streetscape. I try to look at the heritage aspects of it, and my personal view is what's going to be put in there is actually going to improve the streetscape because it's actually set back in line with the existing Russell Street Studio, which makes a much more sensible thing than bringing it to the front of the block, which I think would have a worse impact from a streetscape point of view. I think where we end up in situations like this, we have blocks of land which don't have buildings on them or only have partly buildings on, and people get used to using blocks of land as being their own and move in and out as if that it is their own land. The title deeds show that Ms Jessup owns the whole of that property in Russell Street and the access off Bedford Street. Whether that's factually correct or not, that's not a matter for us to deal with. That's what the title says. And if somebody wishes to challenge that ownership of that block of land, then that's something that needs to be done outside of the decision we're making today. All we have in making a planning decision is the title as it stands today, and that is Ms Jessup's to do that development on. To me, the biggest issues associated with this building are the fact that it's overshadowing the Bedford Street properties. There have been a number of shadow diagrams that have been presented to us by the proponent. Some of those have been challenged by the representatives. All we can do is rely on the fact that these documents are appropriate, and our planning officers have looked at them and studied them, and there certainly is some further overshadowing that occurs as a result of that. But whether they hit the ground or whether they hit the buildings and the light that goes into the rooms is another matter. We also need to be aware that that overshadowing diagram is on the 21st of June, so the shortest day of the year, and each side of that, the actual overshadowing position actually gets better. And I guess if there's no sun on the 21st of June, there is no overshadowing issue in that particular thing. So each day, so the reality of it is, yes, there is overshadowing, so the positioning of the building will have some impact on whether the overshadowing is more or less. current building that's being demolished, half demolished, which is where part of the building will be, is around about the same area as the building is determined to be built. Yes, it will be slightly higher, and I'm understanding that the buildings in this site now have to be 2-storey because of the flood levy mitigation issues, and underneath is a carport and a studio. The proponent is entitled to have a studio for their own personal use, which is what it's stated. Representatives believe it's going to be used for something else, but it is being approved as a studio for the personal use of Miss Jessup. So I've looked through those processes, and we often get these conflicting things that come to council because they're not agreed by everybody, and that's why we've had the representations and a good process that we can go and test the rigour of the decisions that we make. Our planner has gone through all of the representations, looked at those things and made responses in the documents in front of us today, and is still determined that this building is something that we should approve. And I am looking at it, as much as I don't like angst in areas, the reality is I think this will actually add benefit to the area that's there. Yes, it will create some additional overshadowing to places behind the building that's built, but unfortunately that's the way the world is. Even if it was brought forward and built into the building envelope, the amount of overshadowing would be only marginally different. So I believe this is something we should approve today.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Mackenzie, for your words. As usual, he's done a pretty good job of summing it up. There are, in fact, 17 planning discretions required for us today, which is quite a lot, but nevertheless, ones that I think have been addressed partly by changes requested to the plans, such as the site coverage, the rear setback. The plans are to be amended to reduce the floor area so that it meets the under 200 metres that a house in this particular zone must have by opening up the garage to become a carport. There's also parts of the discretions about the changes to the plans about the front fence and the need to put a picket-style front fence as well in front of the brick fence. Ultimately, when I sat and looked at this particular development application, there were two places you could put the building. One was at the front and one was at the right at the rear. The one at the front, whilst it would then throw less shadows onto the properties in Bedford Street, would then effectively cut off access to the rear of the property other than via the lane, which would mean you'd have to send all your cars for people to park at the studio to be accessed via Bedford Street rather than Russell Street. The alternative is to put the unit at the back and then you have the parking at the front. A much more logical exercise, one that opens up the street of Russell Street. Russell Street Park will be clearly visible as you enter. The wall that they propose to build will only go part way down the block, and so whilst it will provide a bit of overshadowing on some of the garden lots, it makes sense, and to me it actually opens up the whole street to being a good neighbourhood, and it does not dominate the street, and that's the thing that to me, by putting it at the rear, is the main benefit. Therefore, you look, what's the disadvantage of putting it at the rear of the property, and that clearly is the overshadowing. But as Councillor Mackenzie said, it is something that is worst on the 21st of June and it is best on the 21st of December when the sun is at the highest. I believe, and the planning scheme says they need to have 3 hours of sunlight per day. When you're on inner residential, that is clearly achievable and in fact helped by the fact that our park will not get built on and therefore there won't be afternoon shadows thrown back over those properties, which could have happened should there actually be further development along that street, because they would have all thrown their shadows back the other way once the sun went over the yard arm. So to me, all things considered, this is a good development. I look forward to seeing it. It does have to be 2-storey, and I think we'll see more of this type of development in and around inner suburban Invermay, simply because those very old houses were built for a price, often by workers with not a lot of money, and ultimately they are difficult to maintain, and in time we will be faced with a similar question about how a unit or a place that perhaps has been destroyed by fire or simply left to fall into ruin, how will that be replaced in the future? And I think we'll look back on this decision to say there's a good example. One of the examples that I like is the roof line. By having 2 pictures on the roof, it actually looks like 2 cottage roofs rather than, and in fact when I looked at the plan I initially thought there were 2 units on there, not 1. So I think they have done everything they can to make this a development that will fit the neighbourhood and actually set a good precedent for the future, despite the overshadowing. And I do have compassion for those people who are overshadowed, but it is never as bad as you might think. Thank you.
Thank you. Question from Councillor Spencer.
I'd just like to ask, thanks Mayor, the traffic assessment, why wasn't there one done for the property?
Thank you. Richard, or planner. Duncan.
Thank you for that question. The proposal was essentially to modify the size of the existing artistic studio and to build it a single dwelling. A single dwelling requires the provision of 2 car parks, and industry standard suggests that a dwelling generates 8 to 10 car movements a day. There was no need to require a traffic impact assessment for a development that was going to increase the use by 8 to 10 vehicle movements.
Thank you. Do you wish to speak now, Councillor Spencer?
Yes, please.
Thank you. You may proceed.
I think it will be a major improvement to the area and it will benefit the community. The overshadowing really worries me for everyone that's not going to get no sunlight of a morning. That's when you really need the sunlight. And to only get 3 hours a day, it really worries me, especially when they're getting all the morning sun out and they're going to lose all that. That is very hard for the residents. Being 2-storey, it is a bit out of character with the area, but there is other 2-storey houses around there. So, you know, that's not the case. It does meet all the council requirements. This is one thing. I've worked at that property for Mrs. Batten many years ago when it was a pottery business, and the work that came out of there was magnificent. I do feel sorry for these people that are going to lose their son, but there's not much we can do. It meets all the requirements. So I'll probably support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Question from Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you, Mayor. From time to time, our shadow diagrams are disputed in developments like this. Can we speak to the veracity of a shadow diagram, please?
Richard, is it, or Duncan?
Okay, thank you. Look, the shadow drawings are provided and drawn by professional architects using their professional skills. There's an expectation that we will accept the professional advice given by such people, and without good cause and solid cause, it's not something we would be looking to get a second opinion on. Most of these drawings are designed by computer programs that generate, the information's inputted and the program generates the plan. So it is a standard expectation that these plans are correct. The architect in question checked all of her work and she provided additional plans for showing different versions of what might happen. These plans are relatively consistent, so I have all expectation that those plans are correct.
Thank you. Councillor Soward.
Thanks very much, Mr Mayor, and I want to start by thanking everyone who came and spoke today, and also who took the time to send us material in the lead up to today. I also want to associate myself with the remarks made by Councillor McKenzie and Councillor Harris, because I think they've summed up the matter in front of us very, very well. I want to start, Mr Mayor, as I said, by thanking everyone who has spoken today, both for and against what's in front of us, but just to express my disappointment that this particular application has created the angst that has been related to us today. I also, as was mentioned, I think by a couple of speakers, saw some of the commentary online, and I also hasten to add, not by anyone in the chamber or the council building today, or by anyone who spoke, but could understand and see how that would create hurt, angst and upset, because it, to my view, was certainly unwarranted, the language and the nature of that conversation. It wasn't a contest of ideas. Let's leave it at that. As Councillor Mackenzie and Councillor Harris have both noted, when we sit under the Land Use and Planning Approvals Act, we need to make decisions based under that Act. And when people come to us, Mr Mayor, and particularly where there's a motion either for or against something involved, I would wager that no one sits down and reads the Land Use and Planning Approvals Act in their spare time. It is a complex document. It's not a document that allows for a motion. And quite obviously it's a piece of legislation. So, yeah, I want to make that clear. I also want to note, Mr Mayor, that interestingly, again, in the Invermay area, I remember speaking on a different item at a different time when we sat as a planning authority, and I talked about Invermay and exciting how it was that the residents and people were developing the area, and that was to do with a matter that created a lot of angst at the time, and that was the Veolia development. Many of the people, Mr Mayor, who spoke to me on that matter as a planning matter, said to me, none of whom are here today, but in the wider Invermay community, that that was the wrong development and we needed something that added to the cultural fabric of the area. They were very, very strong on that. When I read this application today and I see we've got an application for something that's working in the creative arts space, that to me ticks that box. So I do understand, as other speakers have said, the angst that's created for the existing residents, particularly with the overshadowing, and I'll come to that. Mr Mayor, I concerned myself in dealing with this matter in reading through the representations and the responses to those, and I'm going to group some of my remarks together. A couple of the speakers who spoke and some who wrote to us talked about the loss of land and things like that. When you look, Mr Mayor, in the agenda, when we deal with the representations, there's talk of impact on certain residents. For instance, in issue 6, it mentions it's not fair that certain residents will lose access to their off-street parking. The response, Mr Mayor, at law under the Land Use and Planning Approvals Act, the issue of access over private land is a matter outside the provisions of the planning scheme. This is a civil matter. It's not something that we can make a determination on. So I think, as a previous speaker said, Mr Mayor, that you know, when something sits vacant or has a different use for a period of time, that people get used to that, and we all do in our streets, in our neighbourhoods. So I just want to highlight that. The person in question who is putting this application to us today owns the land. And my understanding of that, Mr Mayor, not being a lawyer, but under what's in front of us and what we need to do, if you own the land, you're allowed to use it, providing you do so in a lawful manner. So I understand the angst at losing something, but again, it is someone else's property. Mr Mayor, in the remarks that have come to us today verbally and also via email, people have been very concerned about the traffic. And Mr Payton, in answer to an earlier question from Councillor Dawkins, did explain some things about that. I think, Mr Mayor, in this instance, this is heightened by the fact that Bedford Street and Russell Street are areas of Invermay who do take a lot of traffic normally. And it's usually by people using the shops and the news agency in that little strip on Invermay Road. And I hasten to add, because I do say this, it's one of my bugbears, where people have to drive everywhere when they could walk, that live locally. And there are residents, Mr Mayor, of that area, and perhaps even including some who have made representations to us, who've called me before. I've passed information to General Manager Everhart and others by people using motor vehicles in an inappropriate manner.
Thank you, Councillor Soward. Your time is up. Do you need an extension?
I do, thank you.
Moved Councillor Stosnick, seconded Deputy Mayor. All those in favour, raise your hand. That's all councillors present. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Not associated with this development, but again, if people are using an area incorrectly and overusing it and driving round and round and round and round the block till they find a park at the newsagent, that is going to create those problems, not the problem created by the studio. Key, Mr Mayor, in reading through the representations and our officers' responses to those, is that what's in front of us today is something that complies with the scheme. And I want to just make a very, very clear point. Councillor Spencer might have mentioned about there not being too many two-storey buildings in the area. It talks, Mr Mayor, in here, in response to the development of a two-storey dwelling is effectively mandated by the requirements of the flood code. So these people aren't just going to build it off the, oh, that was a good idea. They're complying with the flood code, which obviously has significant applicability in Invermay. I want to finish my remarks, Mr Mayor, by saying I do understand the angst that something like this has created, but I also recognise the good that it brings. And if we have someone who is complying with the scheme, is spending their own money in doing something that adds to the cultural fabric of our community, provides services as outlined by a number of speakers, I think that's a good thing. Notwithstanding, as I said, I understand that it will create angst because it's new, it's different, and it's something that I guess hasn't operated there before on such a scale. But, Mr Mayor, when we sit as a planning authority, we can take into account that emotion, but we are bound to follow what is in front of us. And again, as you read through this application, it complies. And as such, we need to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Walker? Question?
Some questions, please, Mayor. Thank you.
Question you may.
I'll first go to the envelope itself. Can the officer responsible just explain how the building sits outside the building envelope, especially in relation to the rear setback?
Thank you.
Thank you. The planning scheme at the moment has an acceptable solution for a 4 metre setback from the rear boundary. So the house, or the proposed house, is set within that, and so it breaches it because it breaches the building envelope because it's within that rear 4 metre setback, and also because its height then breaches as the shape of the envelope comes over. The height protrudes beyond that.
Thank you.
More questions, if I may. Thank you, Duncan. And so, why then was it not acceptable to move the building forward, considering that there is a courtyard area at the front of the property? Was that necessary for private open space, or was it just more something that was desired by the developer?
It's the latter. It's the developer's choice to apply for what they want, and our responsibility to assess that application.
So was there any suggestion then that the building could actually be moved forward and take up that the footprint that would be the courtyard, and therefore not have an impact on, certainly reduce the rear setback and not have an impact on the front impact or setback, whatever you'd call it, by roughly 2 metres, I suppose?
Yes, that discussion was had with the architect and applicant in regard to the possibility of moving the property forward, and their assessment and their conclusion was that that would impact on the provision of parking for the use of the rest of the site, and they elected to remain with the proposal they had.
Certainly that would only impact on parking if the courtyard was still included but now protruding into the car parking space, not the removal of the courtyard.
Yes, but there are options. There's always options of how it could be redesigned, but ultimately the applicants propose the development they want, and we make an assessment on that. We have had discussions about alternatives,
yes,
but they've elected to remain with this one.
But yet now, as councillors, we're being asked to provide a discretion at the rear of the building because of that. Well, that's a statement, or it can be a question if you'd like to answer it. But as councillors, that's what I believe we're being asked.
Are you speaking now, Councillor Walker?
No, I'm not yet. Now, I've got a few more questions, if I may. There's a number of local provisions when it comes to the heritage of this street. What is the status of the buildings, the majority of buildings that sit opposite this site? They are on the state register?
The row of conjoined cottages opposite the site are on the local and on the state register. Other buildings in the area are just on the local list.
And when we look at the Historical Cultural Heritage Code, that's part of our local provisions, 13.1 states that we ensure the development is undertaken in a manner that is sympathetic to and does not detract from the historical cultural heritage significance of the places and their settings. can we discuss about how this development ensures that this is undertaken in a manner that's sympathetic to these buildings?
I think the crucial difference here is assessing between change and inappropriate change. So this is a proposal to develop a two-storey building. It's necessary that it's two-storey effectively as a result of the flood requirements. So that's effectively a restriction on the design of the property. They've chosen to set the building back. One of the reasons to set it back is so that it effectively sits behind the existing shed. So the view line as you travel down Russell Street, your eye is attracted principally to the row of terraces, but when you see the existing shed, you'll get an impression of perhaps the roof of this new house behind it, but by that stage your eye is already on the park. So these are the efforts that they've taken in the design to minimise any impact and to make it as compatible as possible. If you put a two-storey, or if you took the shed away, for example, and put a row of two-storey dwellings along the frontage, they would be different to what was there, but the design would still remain compatible. So the biggest thing here is change.
Nonetheless, all I can go on as a decision maker on council is the provisions and the code that we have in front of us, and I'm just looking for reasons why this is sympathetic to and does not detract from the historic, cultural, heritage significance of this strip of houses. And, that's up to...
So you're speaking again now? Or?
No, I'm just...
You've done your two questions you said you were going to have. So.
I have a couple more questions, if I may, Mayor. Thank you. So we do have a clash, it would seem, between the provisions we have for flood provisions for the area, which is that indeed that you do have to build two-storey if you wish to, but also with the heritage provisions, which would say generally doing something sympathetic in that area would be a single-storey building normally, I suppose. So there'd be some contest between those provisions. Without the flood provisions, you would normally say a single-storey would be more suitable to that heritage area.
You're making a statement again,
no, I'm
Councillor.
asking if that's the case. If there were no flood provisions,
well, that's been answered, so we can move on. Next question.
So when it comes to the courtyard and the wall that will create that courtyard, how is that in sympathy with the surrounding area? Because it seems to be like a 2 metre high, 1.8 metre high frontage to a house. Most of the houses in the area, street frontage, open balconies and things like that with low picket fences.
Well, that wall is going to be 8 metres back from the frontage of the property. It will frequently have cars parked in front of it, and we've put a requirement on the permit for the installation of a picket fence along the frontage. So those aspects will break up any impact from that wall, but otherwise it's a wall.
When it comes to the overshadowing at the rear of the property, of course moving the building forward would reduce that overshadowing, and I've had a look at the shadow diagrams, and indeed I've been into some of the backyards and had a look to try and work out what the impact would be. Can you, we're talking about people's living areas at the rear of these houses, and yet I still find it difficult to judge how far, based on the shadow diagrams, up the wall of these obviously their entire yard will be in shade, but I'm having difficulty to work out how far up the wall of these buildings, especially numbers 22 and 24, that would be most impacted, I'd imagine.
I think 24 and 26 will be the most
26,
impacted.
yeah.
The reality there is that both those properties will lose the majority of their sunlight in the morning. They will start to get the sunlight back around 11 o'clock in the morning, and it'll progress from that, and their afternoon sun won't be affected. So undoubtedly there will be a significant impact on those dwellings in the morning, in the middle of winter, and as time moves on, either side, obviously that impact will lessen.
Thank you very much. No further questions. Mayor.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Walker?
Thank you, Mayor.
Your time's nearly up.
As by the line of questioning you might understand, I also share concerns, as some of the councillors do, about that overshadowing. I do think there were eminent solutions to that when we talk about the building not being able to be moved forward because of parking spaces that were required. There does seem to be quite a big space there in terms of a courtyard that's been put in front of the property that would have helped to facilitate that. What seems to be the big problem here is that a lot of these solutions could potentially have been resolved earlier before it came to this table. And we have now neighbours who, you know, are in dead set disagreement with each other, and they will never see eye to eye. And we, as adjudicators, are either going to support one side or the other, but can't make a decision to support both. And yet...
Sorry, we were going to make decisions based on the planning scheme. Thank you.
Certainly,
which is certainly different.
Certainly so.
Thank you. Can you stick to the matter then? Thank you.
Certainly. What I'm trying to get at is not to discredit that decision process, Mayor, but just that decisions could have been taken earlier that might have avoided that angst that's been created. Now, I'm still not convinced that the building does provide that sympathy to the existing heritage code and the buildings that are in that street. It's true it is set back and it's not something that you're going to notice straight away, but nonetheless it's a contemporary modern building that pays little to no homage to its surroundings. And indeed you can argue that, oh, but it removes an old shed that also didn't pay homage to those surroundings. That's true, but that's not what we're here to discuss. We're here to discuss the building that's being proposed. And I find nowhere where it justifies how it is sympathetic to state-registered buildings in that street. That is part of the planning scheme. Those words that are written are fairly unambiguous, and I would be more than happy if someone could tell me more specifically how it does pay that sympathy to its surroundings. I'm sure there's other examples in the area that also don't provide that sympathy. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about this specific development. So I do struggle to support it when I can see that there were eminent solutions that could have been, by the sounds of it, were approached and weren't taken up on. So, yeah, for that reason, I'm struggling to support this today. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Question, Councillor Harris?
Just a question to the point of, and perhaps Richard may wish to answer this, the in sympathy with. Probably one of the worst things that I think people can do when they're building a new building is to try to make it look like an old building. And in fact, I would ask Richard to give his comment on whether the addition to Macquarie House down here is in fact in sympathy with the addition, with what was there prior to the extension being put on the back, or whether or not. That was all, just as a yes or no, whether you think that's a good extension or a bad extension, to show that just because it's modern doesn't mean that it can't be.
Yes, thank you. We'll let him answer the question.
I might just jump in on that one, Mayor. That I think it's quite a stretch to be talking about other buildings in other contexts to be able to draw parallel to this old. So I would consider that an irrelevant consideration for determining the matter that is before the table at the moment.
Deputy Mayor wishes to speak.
Thanks, Mayor. I've certainly appreciated the conversations and the representors in both their written and verbal format. I want to say at the outset that anyone has the opportunity to put forward a proposal to do anything that they wish on land that is theirs. And if, due to a variety of reasons over time, people have used adjoining land in ways that perhaps has become commonplace but not necessarily lawful, then that's unfortunate at this point in time. What I would say is that for me the considerations have been specifically around the overshadowing. I want to acknowledge that in Invermay, of course, we are going to see new, modern developments take place that have to be two-storey in order to meet the flood code. I mean, it's just absolute nonsense to think that you will be able to achieve compliance against the flood code without it being two-storey in most cases. So for me, understanding that there are 17 discretions that require planning discretion, there are 17 matters that require planning discretion. For me, the big one has been consideration to the overshadowing. I think the considerations of what people could do or how they could manoeuvre or change things is absolutely something that could have been considered. It's always a consideration, but at the end of the day, that's not what the applicant has put forward. So it's our job to consider the discretion and how that should impact neighbouring properties. And for me, that's where I sit. And I believe, whilst there will be some change and clearly some impact, as demonstrated by the diagrams that have been provided, and I understand as well the conversations that have occurred with regard to ensuring that there could be some dispute around some of those diagrams. I certainly appreciate that, as is often the case with the sun diagrams. I believe that it deserves support. The way that the planner has worked through the issues, the way that the responses to the representations has been provided, I think is considerable, and I think that with due consideration of the height and the bulk with regard to the setback and the resulting overshadowing, of course there will be some impact, but that this application should be supported today.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Mackenzie, wish to close?
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks everybody for their contribution today. And the only thing I really wanted to finalise on was just on Councillor Walker and his commentary regarding the sympathetic to the heritage provisions. I'd actually struggle to find something coming up better than this, because the reality of it is it has to be 2 storeys to build there. You put it at the front of the block and you're going to detract from everything, I think, in Russell Street as a result of that, because people are going to see that front and centre. The reality is to sit back and it's set along the line of the building that exists at the moment, and therefore somewhat disappears into the line of that building. That wall that you talked about also blocks it off a bit and almost continues the wall of the building, of the art studio. So from my perspective, I can't see whereabouts on the block you would plant something and make it any better unless more sympathetic towards the state-listed properties on the other side of the road. Because I think you drive down Russell Street, you're going to be immediately focused on there and you'll have a void of space there. So I can't agree with you in relation to the sympathy for the heritage provisions. I think we've exhausted, and I think clearly we keep coming back to the biggest issue that we have is the overshadowing. What could have, might have, should have is really irrelevant to the decision we have to make today. We have a planning application in front of us. Our officers have reviewed the planning thing. They've looked at the discretions that have been used, 17 of them. They've then looked at them in relation to the performance criteria, and they've assessed that this property meets the performance criteria and therefore should be approved. I tend to agree with them.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Those against? So 1 against, the rest is for. Councillor Walker is against. We'll go to 9.2. We have some speakers for 9.2. The first speaker is Jeanette Stagall.
I'm Jeanette Stagall from IFA Design. I'm the applicant and also the building designer, speaking on behalf of the owners of 66 Peel Street West. I share the same values as the representors. I reside in the same zone with the same scenic protection overlay and share a boundary in excess of 100 metres with Launceston City Council's Woods Reserve in West Launceston. Since 2013, where a bushfire hazard exists, Tasmania has a mandated requirement for new residential subdivisions to show a building envelope for each block of land. The final stamped and signed permits for this subdivision were issued in 2018 with no such bushfire mitigation details. The assigned plan for this application advises bushfire mitigation is not a planning issue but a building compliance matter. In this instance, I needed to put the cart before the horse in order to determine risk and design options. Justin Cashin from GPM, a consultant who identifies risk and develops bushfire hazard management plans for Launceston City Council and other municipalities in Tasmania, was engaged and a report was compiled and submitted with this DA. Unmanaged dense bushland downslopes north and northwest of the subdivision is identified as a fire risk, particularly 125 Granville Street. In line with that report, our buildings were sited well away from the at-risk boundaries whilst creating sensible vehicular access and egress for the internal site, as well as appropriate solar orientation for the dwelling. With fire mitigation, a necessary primary consideration, the loss of some, but not all, natural vegetation is viewed as collateral damage for a subdivision whose intent appears to be conflicted. We all share Representator's concerns for the subdivision in general, noting clear felling of vegetation of two undeveloped sites sharing a boundary with ours. We understand our application provided a voice for those concerns.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Lois Hayes.
Hello, my name's Lois Hayes. I live at 26 Stanley Street. I'm against the proposed buildings at 28 Stanley Street. They are going to put 3 units up.
That's the next item we're on.
Oh?
This is 9.2 Peel Street West.
Oh. Oh, okay.
Thank you. We go on to Anne Cericia.
Anne Cericia, 25 West Park Drive, West Launceston. I pay respect to Aboriginal owners and custodians of this land. Councillors, I'd like to ask you, how successful are you at carrying out, under the advice of the Aboriginal community, your custodial duties in which you are entrusted? This area of 66 Peel Street and its surrounds have been devastated by the subdivision developer. The applicant to build a residence is not responsible for this, but it's unfortunate that the devastation will continue by the destruction of 6 more trees. Our house, 25 West Park Drive, like 66 Peel Street, lies within the Skyline Protection Area, the Western Hill Precinct, and as Jeanette just said, it's in the bushfire-prone area. We, a few years ago, reluctantly asked the council if we could remove 2 mature trees located 5 metres from the front of our house because of safety reasons. We're told no, because you're in the Skyline Protection Area. But we could prune the overhanging branches. We accepted this. Why can't these trees be allowed to continue to grow to provide shelter and breeding areas for insects, birds and native animals who now inhabit them? When the trees grow large, why couldn't they too be managed by pruning like ours? Are all the trees actually sitting where the house is to be built? If this devastation of bushland continues, we'll have no natural landscape left within this Western Hills area, because a lot of this land is privately owned and obviously planning and council will not provide any protection. Councillors, you've got a dilemma on your hand. It might now be the time to acknowledge this and seek some solutions. Thank you.
Thank you. Helen Tate.
Thank you. Can you hear? Yep. Okay. As in my representation, if you've read that, it is so sad to see the attrition of our city's natural assets, especially our remnant bushland with its carriage of our iconic birds, animals, plants and insects, etc. And certainly my objection here is not so much against the development, but it, as but about putting the cart before the horse. I mean, my big question is, how on earth was this ever approved in the first place when it was scenic zone? And you can't put houses on there without chopping down the big trees and all the little trees. It's on our skyline and so on. So it's the large trees that provide the critical hollows for sheltering and nesting. We call them habitat trees, and it takes from 80 to 150 years for hollows to be suitable for owls and parrots and the tawny frogmouse, which we know live there. If the subdivision is to be allowed in areas of remaining woodland within the city boundaries, then it is inevitable that these sorry decisions come before you. And now we have a decision to fell yet more of the big trees here. I'm asking, and I've been begging, that in a world critically losing its biodiversity and its climate security, that we bring greater focus to the cause clauses of our planning scheme and legislations for the protection of biodiversity, our scenery and our natural values. In considering the DA, I contest that more consideration could have been given to replacement of species more typical to the area. And that we should be strengthening the requirements for council and the owners to follow through on this. I mean, one of the tragedies here is that the land has been cleared totally already, the adjacent land to this block, and so everything's gone already, and I'd be really interested to know about what sanctions are applied on developers who go ahead and do this straight away. Unfortunately, our owner of this, for putting in this DA, is left with the tragedy of that, and they have the last 6-8 remaining trees there, and of course they're in the way of the house and so on.
Yeah,
So,
thank you. Your time is up. If you could finish. Thank you.
look, it's just the issue of the pre-decision on subdivisions and my plea that it's causing all of us a lot of trouble.
Thank you. So that's all the speakers I have here. Are there any other speakers for 9.2? No. Thank you. So we've got 9.2. Move Councillor McKenzie. Is there a seconder? Councillor Harris. Thank you. Do you wish to speak? Yes, Councillor McKenzie.
I do. Thanks very much. And look, thank you very much for the comments made by Staghole and also the representatives in relation to the matter. And I agree with you. We are in conflict. This decision to make this land subdividable on the skyline in the scenic protection area, now overlaid by bushfire mitigation plans that need to be put in place, almost makes it impossible for good mature trees such as what are there now to remain in the longer term, because bushfire management plans will suggest that gum trees are fire attractors and therefore not great storage. I think, as the planners explained to us today, the reality of it is, because we've allowed this to be residential, it means that there's going to be some trees that are going to be knocked down to enable a development to take place on the properties that are there. It's low res, so there's potential for some of those trees to remain, but difficult in the circumstances where you have to put a bushfire management plan in place as well because of the trees around it. So where this is heading into the future, I'm not sure, but we have to sit here and look at this particular, today is making a decision about a particular block of land. I think a conversation about the future of that subdivision area may be something we can hold later on, but we already have zoned low residential development applications, so the reality is that the horse may have bolted in that respect. I believe there were 8 trees to be removed on this block, and we are aware of the block in front which has had trees removed illegally. I understand our enforcement people are looking at how they might deal with that matter. I think the proponents have agreed to retain 2 other trees, so 6 trees, I think, to enable them to fit their building design into the block that they wish to do, have been now what's been determined to take down. I think the property owners appear to have been dealing with, and through Ms Staghole, have developed a building which fits in with the nature of the block that's there and tries to pay homage to the trees that remain on the block that are there. So I think that whilst the overarching thing about why we're here is something we can talk about, the reality is there's nothing we can do about it because that decision has already been made before us. So based on the application that's been put before us today, I believe there is no reason why we should not approve this DA today.
Thank you. Councillor Harris. Question, Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Mayor. Just wondering how many trees will impact where the house is going. All the trees they propose to get rid of, are they where the house is going, or are they separate trees to where the house is getting built?
Thank you. Richard.
If I can refer you to the site plan attachment, it clearly shows the location of the trees to be removed. So in counting those, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 on the plans, but I believe in the, I'll just refer back to my there is an amended plans condition in the report that seeks to retain 2 of those. So the application was for 7, and the recommendation is that 2 of those proposed to be removed are retained.
Thank you.
That's something. Also, the next question, was that our council that let that subdivision happen, or a previous council? Was it Launceston Council or Meander Valley that happened back years ago? Always Launceston. Yeah. Okay.
That was the Launceston Council.
And we let it?
Well, I tried to find the history. I couldn't quite put my finger on the date of the council meeting, but it was post the 1996 scheme, around about 11 or 12, is my understanding, and that would have been a decision of council at the time, based on the facts before it. And that council supported the change of zone at that time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Harris.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, and thank you to Councillor Mackenzie for his words at the start. Only 3 discretions on this particular development application: building height setback and the outbuildings and the scenic management area, which of course is the one that's of most concern to all of us. But as Richard has said, perhaps when you build residential and you've got scenic management over the top of it, it is virtually incompatible to have the 2. You have to remove trees that have grown there to create your houses on the space. And so when you add the fire overlay, it just becomes, there's no winners in this. I believe we have the sins of our forefathers, if you like. The subdivision was approved prior to us. And once it's approved, then it is very difficult to get it unapproved, I would imagine, and particularly when we're now at the development application stage, it's not the time to try to change that now. So the developer has put forward a very good plan. As said, only 6 trees to be taken down. Thankfully, when you look at the site and you look at it from the city, there are a number of reserves that will remain, and with no particular order, there's certainly the Granville Street Reserve, which is the nearest one to this. There are some private blocks which would abut that reserve, and then you come to this particular subdivision. But there's also the Salisbury Crescent and the Woods Reserve, all of which will preserve those areas of trees as you look up over West Launceston. And, over time, the trees that have been cut down and exposed houses where before they were hidden behind trees is something that is difficult for council to control, because once a house is built and then the trees in the view, someone might take the pruning to an extreme extent. So ultimately, at the end of the day, we have a subdivision that's approved, the plans make sense, and I think it's a good development for the block, and ultimately should be approved. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Mackenzie, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. That is all councillors present. That is carried. We go on to 9.3, and I take it we now have a speaker for 9.3. Lois Hayes, still there? Welcome.
Hello, I'm Lois Hayes. I live at 26 Stanley Street. 28 Stanley Street is owned by housing. At the moment, there's quite a decent house on there and garage. They're proposing to knock that down and put 3 units on that one single block, 1 unit being a 2-storey. They'll have 9 parking bays on a single block. The 2-storey one will block out a lot of view for me, and I just don't think that I don't think it'll fit. If you have 3 units on a single block, 1 2-storey, 9 parking places, and another thing too, it's quite a good subdivision. They're going to stick this 2-storey unit on top of another one to make... Why? They've got a perfectly good house there, so I'm just against it.
Thank you. Thank you. That's no other speakers, I think, for 9.3. Someone happy to move 9.3 or move a motion? Councillor Harris, moving. Your seconder, Councillor Walker. Do you wish to speak to Councillor Harris?
I will, to start the conversation. Yes, this is an interesting development for us. Often when we see 3 units on a block, they are in fact all 3 single-storey, and inevitably they would line up down one side of the block. There would be a driveway to access that, and there would be very little public or open space for the residents other than their driveways. And in fact, there's an example of it just further down Stanley Street towards the old Tudor. This is an interesting development because the 2 units are on top of each other, still providing sufficient private open space with the balcony, set back along the line of the existing houses rather than having to come forward to make the most of the land, to then have 6 parking spots on the site. I'm not sure where the 9 came from, but it does seem to be 6 parking spots on the site. I think one of them is certainly an access to a parking spot that could have been mistaken for at least one of those. But nevertheless, it is with 6 parking spots, which is the minimum number that is required, and in fact there should be a 7th one for a visitor spot. However, the visitor spot could be by double-ending the parking, or in fact by parking on Stanley Street, which is a nice wide street. And so whilst this is a different unit application for us to consider, it's one that I think is innovative in the way it's been designed and makes good use and provides reasonable open space for the residents who will live here. And I think that's to be congratulated. And I think it ultimately will not stand out because I think just a couple of doors down there is another 2-storey house that has been built as a house. And so I think the fact that this is 2-storey is keeping in with the neighbourhood character, although no doubt the majority of them are in fact just single-storey. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. And I certainly would concur with Councillor Harris when it comes to this development. And I'm sorry, was it Lois, I think, who just made that representation? I certainly sympathise with you. In this instance, there's some change in your neighbourhood. There will be additional movement. There'll be more people living on that site. That's true. I would ask you to have a look at some of previous iterations of unit developments in your area where they haven't been as sympathetic as this. This will appear, I mean, there's a house a couple of doors down from this one, which is a double-storey house. It'll appear somewhat similar to that. It probably, is comparable to that. And certainly unit developments in the past where they were put in cheek to jowl, I suppose you'd say, maybe, up to 4 or 5 units on a single block. Hopefully, that might suit some people, but this is certainly something that would suit small families, a variety of people, and it will accommodate more people. I'm sure, the representative, as all of us, are aware of the need for housing and the efforts that are being made. This is another iteration in that, I suppose, where with very minimal street impact, and I'm not discounting the fact that this may have some impact, as Lois mentioned, on her view, for example, it will also have an extremely positive impact in terms of us being able to provide housing for our community. That's all. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other, Councillor McKenzie?
Thanks, Mayor. I just stand to support the application as well, and I appreciate the angst it might cause to the neighbour in regards to something that's different. I guess it looks like a two-storey house with a unit sat behind it, which is, as Councillor Walker said, really an unusual development that we see here. Usually we get them stacked on one top of other, so at least there's a bit of room in there in regards to it. And if you look at it from a height point of view, it actually doesn't look a lot different to, from a visual from the upside. So I think the fact that we have a need for housing, this is being done by the housing, by community housing, to try and improve the situation with the number of housing opportunities for people to live in. So I can only support that initiative, but I think as far as designs go in relation to units, it's one of the better ones I've seen for a long time.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Priest?
Yep, I stand to support this application. I think that anybody that would be lucky enough to live in this development, being the 3 small units, will have a lovely outlook. They've got a beautiful front lawn there, lots of green space at the back units as well. I think it will be a value to their situations. In our census data that's been released, or some of the census data this week, it's showing that we need more social housing and that our population here is older, sicker and poorer. So I think that anything that we can do to provide more housing for our community, the better. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Harris, wish to close? I will put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. That is all councillors present. That is carried. So we move on to Mayor's announcements. Just to say that I did attend the Bow War Memorial Service in City Park, and just want to mention that because obviously it's a recognition of those that fought for our country, but also the organisation and those involved were very thankful to Council for our support. CEO, so if you could pass that on, and they are thankful for the way that Council looks after the area, but also worked with them on the day to make it happen, so they're very thankful. Attended Challenge Rally show at Civic Square, Councillor Harris I saw there as well, and again also they invited us out after, but they want to thank Council for the support. They're very appreciative of the support, and spoke to a few of the drivers and those organising, and they were absolutely pleased to be in this beautiful city and realised how beautiful it was, and to get around the city. And some of them even said to me how clean the city is. So it's great to hear that from people that are travelling around, because I hear something opposite sometimes to some locals, but it's great to see other people who come here really appreciate the beauty of Launceston. And some of them are here obviously for the rally, and they said that they are definitely going to come back and to enjoy it a little bit more in the near future. So that was very positive. On Saturday the 25th of June, which is not in here, I did go to the pickleball competitions. That was quite exciting, something different to see. So people from all over Australia, which is quite amazing, were here taking hotel rooms, etc. Some 140, 50 or maybe probably even more of them there. And the games were quite fast, quite different. And pickleball, something that's growing, it's really starting to grow, creating another issue for us though. They want some courts, CEO, so it's something to keep on our agenda when we are doing more basketball courts and netball courts. We need to find some pickleball courts next, because it is growing and quite a few people are taking it up. But it was great to be there and to be involved and to see how enthusiastic that the players were, especially those that came again. Spoke to a few of them from the mainland and just loved their time here in Tasmania and especially in Launceston. Then on Wednesday the 29th, last night, officiated the Community Recognition Awards for the City of Launceston, and congratulations to our Citizen Awards to Darren Papworth and Pooja Joshi, and our community events, the two community events, the Launceston Harmony Day and Launceston Connect, as part of Minds Do Matter. Very worthy recipients, and want to recognise that Deputy Mayor, Councillor Mackenzie and Councillor Harris were there as well. And thank you for attending. So that's it from myself. Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mayor. Just the one item from myself this afternoon. Wanted to recognise the wonderful work of our community development team with regard to the Full Gear initiative. Many of you would have been aware in recent weeks that young people in both Rochalee and Ravenswood have been involved working with a community development project that sees improvements to road safety through the provision of education pertaining to motorcycle riding through a state growth grant and a partnership with the Northern Suburbs Community Centre. Our council staff have facilitated a great program and used the skills of facilitator John that have allowed more than 15 people to become acquainted with the need to be licensed and skilled, the need to wear appropriate safety gear, and the need to be responsible when riding, owning a motorbike. And it was really wonderful, together with Councillor Mackenzie, who I know officiated on behalf of you, Mayor, at the Ravenswood graduation. It was wonderful last Friday to attend the Rochalee session. And, you know, sometimes these small grassroots projects, and credit where credit's due, this one originated in Glenorchy, where there is great impact often is when the projects are small, they're tangible, and they make direct impact to pockets of our community. And I think that this is definitely the case with this initiative. To hear one of the participants on the occasion that I was at Rochalee, to hear Blake speak so passionately about what he had learnt, to hear him speak about his goals and aspirations for the future, and importantly to hear how his passion of owning his own motorbike and riding safely, and to consider how that could filter through his community with himself as a role model was really amazing, and I'm sure it was the case with Councillor Mackenzie on the Tuesday. So I wanted to recognise Claudia and the other members of the community development team that had worked so hard to bring this project to fruition. And also want to note, Mayor, that we're told that there are councils who have received considerable funding for future iterations of the project. So there is an opportunity for us to ensure that state growth, with their commitment to improving road safety, share it around a bit, and the North gets some more funding to undertake another go at this program.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thanks, and thanks, Deputy Mayor, because I just wanted to follow on. I had that on my list of things to talk about as well. And just to sort of take that matter a bit further, there were 15, and I think that in speaking to the general managers of both Starting Point and Northern Suburbs Community Centre, there were probably more like 30 odd that wanted to do it. The program runs for 15 to 16-year-olds, and there's probably a need for people older than that, who are still buzzing around on bikes in those areas without licences and without proper understanding of the road rules. I think what was exciting, and we might have sort of gone out there and thought it was a bit of a fizzer, there were more councillors there than award recipients at the Northern Suburbs Community Centre. But the main reason for that is because four of them had jobs, and so therefore had to go to work. And likewise in Ravenswood, there weren't that many of the recipients that were there because they actually had other activities, because they now had the ability to actually get from A to B. So it's a fantastic initiative, and certainly I know we read things in the paper about often unlicensed drivers, unlicensed bike riders in and around Ravenswood and Rochalee being pulled up by the police. A large part of that is because there's nobody there to mentor them and actually teach them how to do these sorts of things. And John Evans, John's a very big bloke, he looks like a bikie, but a hugely community-driven man, and got great skills and empathy, and does a lot of work in the space of social disadvantage, and a terrific person and role model to teach these people. Big burly guy who actually commands presence by what he's there, but I think some of the designs they came up with for the backs of their shirts and things like that were absolutely amazing, that they designed themselves. I'll hand that around, that's one of them that Danny's taken a photo of. It's just what they actually came up with their own design. They were so proud of it. They had them on T-shirts, they had them on caps. It's really good, but the concept was the $700 to get a learner's licence, to ride a bike. And that's beyond the means of a lot of these young people. And $400 went to actually help them buy some helmets or some protective clothing to sort of make sure they were safe while they were on their bikes. And as Danny said, the issue is now for them to pay it forward and to sort of be that role models and say, now you're the mentors to the next group of people coming through. But I'm certain that there are more people out there that need that assistance, and I'm with Councillor Gibson, is that we need to sort of be promoting ourselves through state growth to try and get future funding for these programs, because they really do work.
Thank you. Any other brief reports from activities from... No? No more? We'll move on. Questions on notice? Oh, no, not there. Any questions without notice from councillors? Councillor Soward.
Very briefly, Mr Mayor, and I do apologise, it only came to me today, and if it's on notice, that's fine. The question was, is it council's responsibility to install, and I'm using the term, animal warning signs on roads to protect native animals being run over and making people aware, or is that a state growth one?
CEO.
Thanks, Mr. Smith. I mean, the General Manager could probably put a specific answer. I mean, there's obviously programs that different councils have run in focus areas with respect to both signage and other prevention tools like geofencing and that type of thing along the roadside. So I don't think it's an actual requirement. The signage, I think warning signage is a requirement, again, it really depending upon who's the local manager of the road as to whose responsibility it is. So.
Great, thanks very much.
Thank you. Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Mayor. Just one question. On the radio the other day, I heard there's 7 vacant school buildings around. I don't know if that's Tassie or wherever. Have we got any vacant big buildings that we can house any people in our area?
Council's currently doing a review of some of its buildings to see if there's any suitable.
And the second point is about where my farm is. I'm going to take that point up with the Northern Midlands Council. Perena Road has always got 5 to 7 dead animals on it. So it's a good point what Councillor Soward brought up.
Is that a question?
Statements.
It's not time for statements. Thank you. Question, Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. In discussions with some of the residents in Inveresk at Russell Street and Bedford Street, they expressed their concern about their residential street being used as a thoroughfare for various people getting perhaps from Invermay Road across to the highway, or to change direction after going to the commercial strip there. Does the council have any policy regarding small residential streets such as this for the provision of perhaps residential area only signs, or indeed traffic calming such as speed humps that would perhaps help to deter people using these streets that are narrow, have houses quite often right up to the footpath for their deviations and shortcuts and things like that on a regular basis?
Thank you. You want to answer it, Shane, or take it on notice? You answer it.
Saves paperwork if I answer it. The one at Bedford Street you raised, if you recall, councillors, that actually came through as a petition for us to investigate some options for traffic management. We've done that investigation engagement with the local community, and what's most supportive is installation of speed humps. So at the moment, our program is we have a small allowance for traffic safety improvements during the year. So it's the start of the financial year, so we work through what the priority projects are. Given we've engaged in this, there's a strong community want for the speed hump. I would expect this would be one of the projects at the top of the list that we will be able to deliver this coming financial year.
Thank you. Any other questions from councillors? No? We go to 13.1, Tender Review Committee meeting. Move Councillor Spencer, seconded Councillor Cox. Do you wish to speak to Councillor Spencer? Councillor Cox? Any other councillor wish to speak to a straightforward motion? I will put the motion. Those in favour? That is carried by all councillors present. 13.2, Council Committee petition to amend sealed plans. Somebody happy to move that? Councillor Harris, and seconded Councillor Priest. You wish to speak to it, Councillor Harris?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This is really just reporting back to the council after a couple of meetings that were held in regard to this matter about a request to amend the sealed plans for 304 and 308 Pinkwhite Road, Norwood. And so the minutes of those meetings have been circulated, and this is really just the formal acceptance by the council of our report.
Thank you. Councillor Priest. Any other councillor wish to speak? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand, and that is all councillors present. 14.1, proposed street name, Barbara Close. Move Councillor Harris, seconded Councillor Soward. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Harris?
I will briefly. Barbara Close is in West Launceston off West Park Drive, and it is a new street that the landowners previously were David and Barbara Deven. So that's the reason for the name, and their son is the developer, Terry. So to me, a good use of the name Barbara, which interestingly does not appear in any other street in Tasmania.
Thank you. Councillor Soward.
Very supportive, Mr Mayor. The only thing that I would say, and it certainly wouldn't stop me from voting for this, at times there can be confusion around the name of a street where it actually is very similar to someone's name. So in the future, if we've got a Barbara Close living in Barbara Close, that might be interesting.
Thank you. Any other speakers? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 14.2, proposed street name, Tasha Street. Tasha. Councillor Soward. Move, seconded Councillor Coxwell. Yep. Councillor Soward, wish to speak to it?
Yeah, all very straightforward, but just again echoing my remarks earlier, I actually wasn't trying to be funny. It can create confusion where there is similarity between a street and a name. Thank you.
Councillor Cox. Any other councillor wish to speak to it? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all all councillors present. That is carried. 15.1, budget amendments. Move Councillor Mackenzie. Seconded Councillor Harris. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Mackenzie?
I need to say it was nice that I was missed last time when we were talking numbers. Look, I think the officers do a really good job, I think, in explaining the reasons why these things come up. There's just a need for us to advise things where they move from capital operating to capital, and there's, such as the case in this situation, which actually improves our underlying result.
Thank you. Councillor Harris? Any other councillor wish to speak? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. So 15.2, fees and charges. To remove Councillor Mackenzie. Is there a second to Councillor Harris? Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Mackenzie?
I think the narrative's well explained in the documents.
Councillor Harris? Any other councillor wish to speak? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. We now move on to 16.1, Queen Victoria Museum and Art Gallery. Move Deputy Mayor, seconded Councillor Dawkins. Deputy Mayor, you wish to speak to it?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I do. And it certainly feels as though we are at an exciting junction with regard to the City of Launceston's QV Mag, and specifically with regard to our futures plan and the recommendation parts that are listed in 1, 2 and 3, with the interim brand included in this recommendation. It feels as though we are on the cusp of something pretty special, and it feels as though the work that has gone on before with regard to significant bodies of review and research, now matched with the energy and the seeming full appreciation of the ability for QV Mag to transform itself and therefore our community, is as strong as it has ever been. The key directions, the 5 key directions, represent, of course, significant change and aspiration for the organisation and for our community, but importantly provide significant return for our community. The QVMag is not and never should be seen as an elite institution. It should be at the core of our community offering, a place for everyone to grow, to be educated, to feel that they belong, to feel inspired, to be lifted up, to be educated and to be transformed. And whilst there are significant capital infrastructure projects, for me, the most significant work will be undertaken in the buildings and in the programs that we already have. And indeed, if we get to fully realise the plan with the infrastructure components, then that will be a bonus. Because the great thing about the QVMag now more than ever is that it sees that in order to fully realise its full potential, in order to fully garner the support of other levels of government, we first need to get our own house in order. And for me, it feels like for the very first time since I've been a part of this council, that the 5 clear key directions allow us to do that. For me, the increase for funding, specifically through our own work in increasing own source revenue, the opportunity for advancement and philanthropic support, and obviously the development of a commercial strategy are indeed at the core of what we've needed to do for so long. And for the first time, I think I genuinely feel as though I've now got the confidence that that's going to happen. Because it's only when we achieve reform and change and advancement ourselves are we able to fully put out our hand and say to the state government that you need to improve the level of funding that you provide to this important institution. In direction 3, 4 and 5, there are some transformative bodies of work that I think will really cement the role of this institution at the core of so many components of our community. For me, I'm really excited by the diverse and consistent outreach program, the opportunity to really connect, the opportunity to feed into the work of our Aboriginal education, science and education program with our connection to our own partnership plan that's being undertaken. The opportunity for us to increase our QVMag visitation through a variety of different means to connect our brand with the offering that is being hopefully grown by so many other components of the tourism and visitor economy. I really want to congratulate Shane and the entire team with regard to this forward-focused transformational QVMag Futures plan. Of course, it is new, it's bold, it's strategic, but at the same time, Mayor, it feels to me really real and quite achievable. And of course, many will focus in on the hardcore infrastructure components. And of course, that's an exciting component of the program. But for me, it's just the icing on the cake. Because it feels like even if we don't get to that level, if we're able to achieve the other 90% of things that are in this program, that in itself will be an incredible achievement for our staff, for our community, and indeed for Northern Tasmania and the state as a whole. I want to acknowledge that it takes a whole team, and we have an incredible team at the QVMag, and no doubt Shane, as the leader of that team, knows full well the breadth, the diversity of the team.
Thank you, Deputy. Your time is up. Do you need an extension?
Almost there.
Move to Councillor Sowers, second Councillor Stojanczyk. All those in favour? That's all councillors present. You may continue.
But what I want to say, Mayor, is that at this important time in the QVMag's lifespan, this represents a commitment to change and to be different. And it's not just the plan and the council that's going to see that occur. It's going to be absolutely everyone in the institution, both within the QVMag Directorate and across our organisation, that becomes committed to seeing this plan fully realised. And I hope, if indeed it's my goal and hope that this is fully endorsed by everyone today, then it will be similar sentiment shared throughout the organisation. because then real change can be effected, real transformative impact can be realised. And I really think it's possible.
Thank you. Councillor Dawkins.
Yes, I agree. It is possible and it is time, and this is the right director for the job. Over the last few years, we've seen the beginning of that transformation. As I've indicated before, walking into the art gallery and being a part of that, the current permanent exhibition, it felt like an enormous weight had lifted off that building. We'd been treading into that building for years on end, seeing not too much change, but that same oppressive sense in the Colonial Gallery that was really hard to shake for me. And I never really understood why. I didn't feel like it was for me until it felt like it was for me. And I think that transformation, being able to continue that, is incredibly important for our community, because the timing of right now, we've come through a pandemic where people haven't been able to travel, but prior to that, more people were coming to Tasmania than ever before. But here we are in a community of significant disadvantage, where people are looking for ways to be able to engage with community, be a part of community that doesn't cost an enormous amount of money to them. And we haven't been able to marry that in this really important cultural space in a way that I'm really hoping we can in the future. And this document makes me feel like we can. So we can understand our place in Tasmania, in Launceston, the opportunities that visitation will bring to us, while understanding who we are as a community through this incredibly important collection. And for me, it's a part of that is the decolonisation of this collection and the way that we view it. This has always been a place of what can only be called white supremacy, and we know that it can't be in the future if it is going to relate to our community. So I endorse these steps forward, including our Indigenous community, not in a way where we bring people in to say, what do you think about this? How do you feel about this juxtaposition of pieces? But bringing people in to be a part of it from the ground level, to build it up, so that our Indigenous communities are a part of every step of the way of changing the way that we view and value culture in Launceston. I also really like this sense of broadening the way that it's funded. It's absolutely vital. We certainly can't expect it to be through our rate base. It can't be through grants. And the state government have pushed back when they could, but now we need to lead them to ensure that they say yes to this incredible opportunity, whilst understanding there are still philanthropists out there, but also that commercial sense. I mean, that is a contemporary model for an organisation and an entity like this, and it gives me great pleasure to read this document and speak in support of it today.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Again, I rise to support this wholeheartedly. Shane, fantastic job you and your team have done to put this together. What it does is it just brings everything to the surface. That I think there's been lots of things that are called an undercurrent, I think they call it, of lots of things going on under the surface in regards to the QV mag. It brings all of the issues that we've been talking about. I think Councillor Gibson and I sat on a committee back in 2011 where we looked and did a review of the QV mag, and it's great to see some of the things like the governance structure and things like that being brought to the fore in this document. But there are so many things in there, and I think that when we've spoken to the government in the past about supporting your challenge, should we be on two sites, and a number of things that they kept on pushing back at us. But I think if they read this and have a look at it, this is a really thorough review of what we do and what we actually mean to our community and what it can do going forward. So I think that, you know, in our conversations with government going forward, we've got some real tangible things to say, this is what we're doing, this is the direction we're going in, that's why you need to support us. And I'll go back to, I think, when Rosemary Armitage sat around this table, she went back and found a document of about 1920, I think, that showed that when QV Mag actually set up, it was a split funding arrangement between the council and the state government. So it was a 50-50 arrangement. That's now come down to something like about 15% to about 85% or whatever the number is in there. We now need to get that rebalanced. But I think with this document and the steps that we will take will give us a much better argument to go back to the state to say this is why you need to support us and this is why it's important. So I wholeheartedly endorse the direction that this is taking, and I hope all the other councillors around the table see that way as well.
Thank you. Councillor Soward.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and I rise to totally support the remarks from the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Dawkins, and Councillor Mackenzie, I think it's a wonderful step forward, and add my voice to congratulate all of those that have been a part of this. So again, not going to repeat what's been said there, but there's a couple of interesting things for me in this, Mr Mayor, and again it is spelled out in the futures plan. But those out there in the community perhaps who find it easy to criticise council at budget time with fee and rate charges and all the rest of it, would be interested to note on page 70 of our papers that we currently contribute $7.65 million per year to this wonderful facility. So I think it's really important to understand that, because if this council said, or not this council, the next council that's elected in October said for next year's budget, we're not going to give any money and we'll shut the museum down, I'm sure people wouldn't go, that's a great idea, because it's iconic in our state. I'd also add, Mr Mayor, and it's spelled out again in the document, the difference in funding that our wonderful facility receives and TMAG. And whilst obviously I want to keep my remarks very positive, and the TMAG is indeed located in the state capital, the work across the two sites at QVMAG is just top drawer. It also mentions, Mr Mayor, on page 70, that the QVMAG also provides a significant educational contribution to the region, with 30% of education bookings coming from beyond the greater Launceston area. I would say to that, Mr Mayor, if you didn't visit the museum as a primary school student, did you even go to school? I would say. Because I reckon every year in primary school, the school I attended went, and we probably went more than once, and it was just terrific. And I'm sure school children today are still enjoying the two sites, not to mention things like the Phenomena Factory and those sorts of other things that have been in play there for a number of years. I want to obviously also, the last thing I want to say is that off the back of the pandemic that we've had and the challenges that we've had as a nation and indeed as a global society, the fact that we've got something here that isn't just going to be a document that sits on the shelf but helps future-proof the QVMAG is something that's really, really critical. And Councillor Dawkins touched on it when she talked about funding and the way that museums and cultural organisations can connect with their community. I think it's a wonderful document. I think it's a great blueprint going forward, and obviously look at to the future when these things that are in there become reality and aspirational and become reality, and obviously continue to add to the wonderful fabric of our terrific city. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. If I could just start with a question to the CEO, and it's in regards to some of the aspirations in the document and some of the options, and it's just in regards to how the community will have input into some of those longer term goals that are there.
Thank you. If the CEO can answer that.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and it's a good question. So it's largely an operational based plan, and to this point we've engaged with yourselves, with employees, with the QVMAG Advisory Committee, as well as the Aboriginal Reference Group that service the entity in its development. It's certainly fully intended to undertake further community engagement as the directions proposed in the plan are developed and actioned, and this would be particularly around the proposed governance changes and the building redevelopments. You know, it needs to be understood that there's still a lot of meat, a lot more work that needs to be done to put the flesh on the bones on those proposals before we can have meaningful community engagement around the proposal. So that's fully intended to happen, but again, we needed to set the direction, which this document does, and then as that progresses and we're ready, we'll certainly engage with the community at those important junctures around those directions.
Thank you. Do you wish to speak?
I do, thank you, Mayor.
Yep, you may speak.
Thank you, Mayor. And it's a pleasure to be on council at a time when this document comes forward and to have an opportunity to vote on this today. As Launceston, as probably most places in the world, we can take things for granted quite easily, and I do think that QVMAG, for local people, can suffer from that. We know it's there. We might visit occasionally if we've got children that need entertaining or visitors from interstate. But it is very special in the heart of quite a few Launcestonians as well. who don't take it for granted, who will be very interested in this document. And I encourage them, of course, to go online and have a look at the attachments to today's agenda and to have a look at the plan. I can't say that I agree wholeheartedly with everything in there. I doubt if everyone, I won't speak for the councillors, so I shouldn't do that, but I will only say that, you know, there are some things there that I do question. But certainly the change in direction that's being put forward here is the most important thing. To bring people in, as this document suggests, that will have the expertise, a skills-based board who can focus on what this facility needs. And for council to have brought someone in our General Manager, Shane, who has been able to facilitate bringing these ideas to fruition, is exactly reflective of what the Queen Victoria Museum needs, and that is that skills-based authority who can take it to the next level. Not to mention the benefits that a company limited by guarantee could bring to the organisation, just in regards to its ability to attract funding and for its ability to engage differently with other levels of government. So a lot to digest, and certainly a lot to look forward to. Some of the options that are canvassed in there also, rationale is given as to why they're probably not the preferred option, and I think that's important for people to understand as well, that, you know, in going on this journey, different things have been countenanced, and that is the reason I asked the CEO that question about community input, because at certain steps along the way, there are some very important decisions to be made in terms of what gets pursued and what doesn't. But it's very exciting times, and to think that we have this, you know, $200 million collection in our community. Yes, it is something that the council, you know, spends a significant amount of money on, and rightly so. This is what we provide. This is part of the cultural experience of living in Launceston. But you know, if I could echo for a moment the words of Councillor Dawkins, you know, and to say that those relationships that need to change in order for this organisation to take the next step, for the maturity in terms of relationships, of course, with Aboriginal Tasmania and that cultural experience, and for the maturity also of how we tell that story of European Tasmania in a different way, in a revealing way, how that will change, how we will display that, and how we will acknowledge that colonial experience and take that to a post-colonial level, which just means basically that we become conscious and aware of our place in history. And so, I shall finish as I started by saying it's indeed an honour to be on council when this decision is made. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Question from Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a question in the executive summary about the transition to a company limited by guarantee. Of the executive summary, the 5 strategic directions, other than the outcomes for Royal Park, which has a date of the 2027, none of the others actually have any sort of indicative dates. I was just wondering if there's a rough timeline that might be for the... what I would see as one of the first steps, and that is to transition it to a company limited by guarantee to enable it to then move forward.
Thank you, CEO.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. So, yeah, that's certainly the low-hanging fruit as far as we're concerned in terms of being able to set the entity up for future success. So we would be looking, say, in the next 24 to 36 months. It is a fairly significant undertaking. There's other entities that have been through this across Australia, and there's a lot of learning that we can take through those, and we intend to do that with Shane and myself and the team with QVMag. So, yeah, we purposely haven't put timeframes on those things because it's, as Councillor Walker's alluded to, in terms of the engagement, the the process that needs to be a part of it, it's going to take some time, and it's hard to predict exactly what that's going to be.
Thank you. Councillor Harris, wish to speak?
I will briefly, thank you, and thank you to the other previous speakers. They've taken all the low-hanging fruit as well. There's not much left to say, other than I will note that we have got the QV Mag interim brand to be part of this motion, and in fact, if people look at the covers of the QV Mag Futures Plan, it actually has the new logo as part of it, with the V from the QV and then the word MAG written underneath it, the A creating the two triangles that point together to meet, and I guess that really becomes part of the branding that we're going to have. So I'm quite happy to support this as a great step forward, and I look forward to how it rolls out over the next few years.
Thank you. Any other councillors wish to speak? Deputy, if you'd take... Oh, no, you can't. Councillor Soward, if you'd have the chair, I'd say a few words too. And this is exciting. It is, and everybody has said it's absolutely fantastic times, and for long, over the years that I've been around on council, the QV Mag has been that question of where do we go with QV Mag, what can we do with it, and it's something that I've struggled with and spoken to different CEOs over the time. But I want to thank our CEO. I think he initiated the start of this. He did an absolutely amazing job to start the ball rolling, to think of what we could do, and then to congratulate Shane on following through and to adding to the document as well. And I think it's been a great teamwork of working together, and it shows you what you can do when you get new blood into the organisation as well, and I think it's been absolutely fantastic. There's a number of points that I think I will just briefly raise, and that's cultural tourism. It's so important in Australia today and the world. It's something that is growing. We've seen that in Hobart with Mona, and it can happen here. There's no reason why it can't. It hasn't happened here, and that's because we haven't had the foresight and the plan to move into a new direction and to move into a direction that people want to go. Actually, cultural tourism is one of the largest and fastest growing tourism markets in an industry that there is. So that's worldwide, and that's extremely important, and we need to tap into that as well. And that's what this will do, I believe. Also, the council has a firm belief that re-imaging that QV Mag will increase that cultural visits to the region, which is going to help us as a community and our businesses in our CBD. More people in town, more people staying here, more people visiting, not just driving through, but actually staying and doing things in our city. And what's also important for us, and I'm so thankful that we have a city deal. And the city deal is extremely important, has been 500 million to date through our city. There's going to be a lot more of the city deal, and this will be part of that going forward, the city deal, that we can get the funds state, federal and from council as well, to make sure that this, and from many entrepreneurs in the city, and the many entrepreneurs in the city won't give money generally to a council. It just doesn't happen. But to a charitable institution, they are more than keen to give money to charity and to an organisation. And once this gets rolling and people can see the changes and what is happening, and it is a charitable institution, I believe we'll see significant funds come from the many in our community who are doing well as well. And the final part for me, I mean, it's all exciting, so I'm not just pulling this out, but really the exhibition, or the showcasing what we have in our collections, is going to be something that I think is extremely exciting and something that we should put on the forefront as soon as we can. I know it's a long-term plan, but it's something that's exciting. We have so much in the collections in our QV Mag that most of us wouldn't even know. Most people wouldn't understand. But just to name a few, that the Tasmanian and King Island emu collections is in there. QV Mag has the most important skeletal and subfossil collections of these extinct birds in the world. Both were driven to extinction shortly after European settlement through our exploitation for food. That is in our collections. So wouldn't it be great if that was in this building, that people could actually walk by and see as well? But also the R.H. Green Tasmanian Bird and Mammal Collection, the most important collection of Tasmanian birds and mammals, not just in Tasmania, in the world. In the world. Wouldn't it be great if that was on exhibition as well? And I could go on. There's so many other things that are in that collection, and I thank Shane for giving me a list of this as well. And it was great to just go through and see what is in that collection. And I'd be excited to be able to, yes, as a young child, I don't know who was that, Councillor Soward? We all went to the QV Mag, the school kids. But isn't it great if we can keep going back as adults, and we keep going back to collections, we keep going back to this new display, and we can see what is actually there, and encourage our children and grandchildren and our friends and our visitors to go and see it as well. So it is exciting. Well done to the team, and like the others have said, I believe this can be achieved and will be achieved in the near future. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Hand the chair back to you.
Thank you. Deputy, do you wish to close?
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks to all of those people who have spoken. And I know and think I recognise that everyone appreciates the value that the QV Mag, being the country's largest institution in regional Australia, the importance that comes from the collection and the assets that we have here. I think in an opinion piece in the newspaper on Tuesday, arts and cultural researcher Dr Kim Lehman says it best when he notes that the QV Mag overhaul is overdue and needed, and that the status quo is just unsustainable. And we all recognise that as well. Importantly, in part 2 in the recommendation, it's noted that the council retains ownership of the collection and, importantly, the assets. And I know for many in our community that is the single biggest concern in realising any change to do with the QV Mag. What happens to the ownership of the collection? So that's spelled out in the recommendation as well. As other speakers have said, importantly, as we move to a new fit-for-purpose governance model, many things will need to be undertaken, and I note that they are too spelled out in point 2 of the recommendation with regard to the specific things that need to be undertaken in terms of the establishment and implementation of various strategies and bodies of work. And as has been mentioned as well by Councillor Harris and others, we're also endorsing the interim brand. I want to say, isn't it amazing what can be achieved in-house, as has been the case with regard to this future directions and indeed the brand for the organisation. The Mayor has recognised the CEO. I want to do that as well, but I also want to recognise those that have gone before with regard to the bodies of work that have been undertaken that see us get to this point, and they are referenced in the report, and I think it's only through our commitment to those bodies of work that have been undertaken would we be at this confidence level to be able to embark upon what I think is a real tangible set of recommendations and a map forward for the future. I think we should be really proud, Mayor, in conclusion, of the collection, of the facility, and now all that needs to be done is it unleashed to realise its full potential for our community and for the state more broadly. And we look forward to supporting Shane and the team to fully realise what the QV Mag can be for the state of Tasmania and, importantly, for the city of Launceston.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. We have a motion now that we're going to close council. Sorry? Oh, we have two. Oh, missed that. 17.1. Moved Councillor Mackenzie. Seconded Councillor Harris. Do you wish to speak to Councillor Mackenzie?
Oh, I do, and I'd have to say it's one of those things that I think really has hit the mark so well in Launceston, and quite frankly, I think it's great that we've got the KPIs that are designed around the success of the project. But I think even without that, just at the moment, I would say the money we spent last year was well invested, and I think spending another $25,000 this year is equally well spent, because it's amazing how Launceston, the city of gastronomy, actually falls off the tongue of so many people that I speak to, both here and interstate. And certainly from an airport point of view, we see that as a huge part of our future branding and things like that. So I think it's a really good concept which has been well thought out, well worked through, and I think already adding significant value to the city of Launceston. We're already the most visited city-state or city in the country relative to its size, and I think this can only sort of enhance our reputation. So I rise here in great pleasure to support the additional funding for this year.
Thank you. Councillor Harris. Question, Councillor Harris?
Thank you, Mayor. Just a question regarding the other councils' contribution going forward and also our contribution beyond this next year. This seems to only be for this particular next financial year. So have the other councils agreed to also fund into the next financial year, or are we out on our own on that respect?
CEO.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. So we've only been approached, all of the councils listed and have previously funded, but have been approached to fund for this single year. So it's proposed in the annual plan, though, that they are going to progress towards a multi-year funding agreement and seek to achieve that across all of the councils, and also they are going to seek further funding from state government as well as private sector to be able to fund this program moving forward. But we should expect that this time next year, or hopefully a little bit before this time next year, we'll get a proposal for multi-year funding with a multi-year program, which will give us more certainty in terms of what the program is moving forward.
And I take it the other councils haven't considered it yet, so...
I don't know whether they've considered it yet is the answer to that, but the intention is that, and certainly at General Manager level, there's good support for it.
Thank you. So, Councillor Harris, wish to speak?
I will just briefly. Councillor Mackenzie said most of it. As he said, this has been a great thing for Launceston, and perhaps more people have understood what it means to be a city of gastronomy more than we ever thought they would. And I think going forward, it will become more and more important, and hence my question about whether, in fact, we would have a multi-year agreement, because it would seem to be the right way to go on this particular, as supporting this particular branding for the next 3-5 years, and giving them surety of response is probably a great thing for them. But we've only got 1 year at the moment, $25,000. I think it's money well spent.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mayor, and I too think this is a fabulous plan, an action plan that will see the City of Gastronomy concept fully realised, and I thank all of those that have contributed to it. I think importantly, here is an opportunity for us to really get going with the City of Gastronomy. We've all committed to it in year one. We understand the big ticket ideas of what it could do, and they are listed importantly in the action plan: build economic, cultural, social, environmental prosperity for Northern Tasmania. We've had buy-in from other parts of the other municipalities, other parts of the state that have said, yes, we agree that this is a great thing to be a part of. And now I think we've got the people and the impetus to be able to really get on and achieve things. We saw when Visit Northern Tasmania came and presented their forward roadmap for the coming 12 months that one of their 4 priorities was the City of Gastronomy. We know with our own tourism undertaking, our own branding work, and even the adoption of the QVMag Futures Plan, that critical to it is us working together in this space. Because the City of Gastronomy is all of us. It's not just an organisation that's going to deliver for us. It relies on us ticking off some of the objectives that can be embedded in the strategic intent of what City of Gastronomy is. So it's not us just providing an amount of $25,000 and saying, go away and do all the work for us and ensure we retain our designation. It's about us ensuring that in our own tourism plan, in our own tourism staff action plan, in our own branding alignment, in our own QVMag plan, in our own events strategy, and importantly in our own northern suburbs work, that critical to that is alignment with what the City of Gastronomy is. It's only then that we'll be able to fully realise all of the great things that are listed in the action plan, and fully realise, I think, the full capability of what City of Gastronomy can be for us. We know through the significant world networks that are open up to us with regard to being a part of the City of Gastronomy, the Creative Cities Network, that great things can come from that. We now need to get on with it to allow the board to be able to fully achieve what it is that we set out to achieve when we received the designation, and to impact our community through those lenses, through environment, through cultural, through economic, and importantly through social lenses, achieve what it is that we set out to. And I think it's really possible, and I actually think it's really easy. We just now need to all get in behind it, believe in it, talk it up, and great things will come from it. And I do believe that people will come. We know people visit UNESCO designated cities, and there is the invitation for us. And of course, great things in terms of food security and the like are a byproduct, an important byproduct of our designation, but work that's already happening regardless.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to point out that I suppose, as a council, of course, it would appear that we're very supportive of this. It's not something that the council can necessarily wade into, and this is the perfect way for the council to be able to show that support through the financial backing of these things. I suppose not dissimilar to how the council supports Tamar NRM, for example, where you've got a dedicated group of people who are focused on their particular area of expertise, and that's the case here. And so the Tamar Valley, the greater Tamar Valley, the greater northeast of Tasmania has such a wealth of agricultural and gastronomical delights, and that list just seems to keep growing. So what a perfect a perfect match for Launceston that in last year the people behind applying for this UNESCO certification achieved that, and it's such a good thing that the council are able to support that, to watch it grow, and I'm sure it'll continue for many years to come, and it will strengthen our region in so many different ways, and so many good things that will come of it in the world of gastronomy that will benefit the region in so many different ways. So yeah, I look forward to it.
Thank you. Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you. Yes, I also stand to support the spend of $25,000 for the next year for the City of Gastronomy. It's been such an interesting project to watch. For a long time I thought it was at a higher end than I thought that our community really needed, but they've really proved their chops, I think, from the breadth and the depth of the program, especially when you think Able Kitchen working with St Giles, what a fantastic initiative. But I'm really excited about the school lunch program, which had been something that had been really difficult to fund. This current state government had put a lot of effort into talking about it, but hadn't seemed to be any way to really be able to facilitate it. So working with the Canteens Association, for me, that's why this program really ticks the boxes, because, if you look at sort of the last 50, 60 years of the way that food's been produced and eaten in Tasmania, we've come from a place of everybody having a backyard and being able to produce beautiful seasonal food and expecting to have beautiful seasonal food, to then having the duopoly really control what's available to people, and also fast food having such an incredible impact through American cultural imperialism. But here we are again. Food's changed so much over the last even 6 months that now things we thought we could have at just the flick of our fingers have become out of reach through all of the things that have impacted upon food security all over the world at the moment, but we're feeling it here in Launceston as much as anywhere else. So to have an organisation like this already implanted, to be able to utilise the community that we live in, to understand the period of history we're in, and I think to stake a claim on something that's much more rational, much, much healthier, much better for the entire community. So it really has my support today.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Mackenzie, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand, and that is all councillors present. That is carried. Now, I think we can have a motion to go into closed council. I might get it right. Councillor Soward moves, seconded Councillor Harris. All those in favour, please raise your hand, and that is all councillors present. That is carried. We will now go into closed council.